Story 1. I stayed in a lighthouse overnight. The ad was tucked in the corner of the newspaper, half hidden under a smudge of ink. Help wanted, lighthouse keeper's assistant. 1 week, remote island, good pay. Inquire at 47 Wharf Lane. I was 19, broke and desperate. Rent was due, and my fridge held nothing but a jar of mustard and a wilted carrot. The idea of cash for a week's work on some lonely rock sounded better than another shift flipping burgers. So, I went to Wharf Lane. The office was a shack that smelled of fish and damp rope. A man with a beard like a bramble thicket sat behind a desk piled with nautical charts. He called himself Lenny, said he was the keeper of Gull's Tooth Lighthouse, a crumbling relic on a speck of an island 30 miles off the coast. He needed someone to help with basic duties, cleaning, oiling the lamp, keeping watch. His eyes, gray as the sea before a storm, sized me up. "You're not afraid of isolation, are you, Winslow?" he asked, my name sounding heavy in his gravelly voice. I shook my head. "Good," he said, sliding a contract across the desk. I signed without reading the fine print. 2 days later, I was on a boat, the horizon a smear of gray. The sea churned, spitting foam against the hull. Lenny steered, his hand steady on the wheel, his beard whipping in the wind. "Storm's coming," he muttered, glancing at the sky. "Always does out here." The island emerged from the fog like a jagged tooth, the lighthouse a crooked spire atop it. Gulls screamed overhead, their cries sharp as broken glass. As we docked, the air hit me, thick with the stench of seaweed and decay, like something dead had washed ashore and rotted under the sun. I gagged, but Lenny just chuckled. "Part of the job, kid. You'll get used to it." The lighthouse was a hollowed-out shell of stone, its paint peeling like dead skin. Inside, the air was damp, the walls slick with condensation. A spiral staircase wound upward to the lamp room, and a small living area sat at the base. 2 cots, a table, a kerosene stove. Lenny showed me the ropes. Check the oil, clean the lens, keep the light burning. "Never let it go out," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Ships depend on it. Lives depend on it." I nodded, though his intensity unnerved me. There was something about the way he looked at the lamp, like it was more than just glass and flame. That first night, we ate canned beans and stale bread at the table. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Lenny leaned back, his chair creaking under his bulk. "Ever hear about the ghosts out here, Winslow?" he asked, his eyes glinting in the lantern light. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. "Ghosts?" I said, trying to sound casual. He smirked, picking at his teeth with a splinter of wood. "This place has stories. Old keepers, lost sailors. Sometimes you hear things. Footsteps, whispers. Sometimes you see things." He paused, staring at me. "You believe in that sort of thing?" I shook my head, my skin prickling. "Good," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Keep the light burning and you won't have to worry." Sleep didn't come easy. The cot was hard, the blanket thin, and the storm's wail seeped through the walls. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, where shadows danced from the flickering lamp above. Lenny's cot was across the room, his snores a low rumble. Around midnight, I heard something, a faint creak, like a floorboard under weight. My eyes snapped open, but the room was still. Just the storm, I told myself, just the wind. But as I drifted back to sleep, I could have sworn I heard a whisper, soft and unintelligible, like a voice carried on the sea. The next day was gray, the fog so thick it swallowed the horizon. My job was simple. Scrub the salt-crusted windows, check the oil reserves, sweep the endless dust from the stairs. Lenny was gone most of the morning, checking traps on the other side of the island. For what? He didn't say. I worked alone, the silence broken only by the gulls and the distant crash of waves. The lighthouse felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. Every groan of the wood, every drip of water echoing in the stairwell made me jump. By afternoon, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. No one was. At dinner, Lenny was quieter, his eyes distant. He chewed slowly, staring at the flame in the lantern between us. "You hear anything last night?" he asked suddenly. My stomach twisted. "Just the storm," I lied. He nodded, but his gaze lingered on me like he was searching for something. "Good," he said finally. "Keep that light burning." That night the whispers came again, louder, closer. I sat up, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Lenny's cot was still, his breathing steady. I told myself it was a dream, but my hand shook as I checked the lamp before dawn. The flame burned bright, but the air felt heavier, like the lighthouse was holding its breath. On the third day, things got stranger. I found a door in the basement I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a stack of crates. It was iron, rusted, with a heavy padlock. I asked Lenny about it over lunch. His fork froze mid-air, and for a moment his face was unreadable. "Storage," he said curtly. "Old equipment. Don't bother with it." But his tone was sharp, and his eyes followed me as I cleared the plates. That afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak felt deliberate. I kept busy, polishing the lens until my fingers ached, but the unease grew. That night, the storm hit harder. Rain lashed the windows, and the wind screamed like a living thing. I woke to a sound, not a whisper, but a scrape, slow and deliberate, coming from the stairwell. I grabbed the lantern, my breath shallow, and crept to the door. The light caught nothing but stone and shadow. "Lenny?" I called, my voice thin. No answer. His cot was empty. I climbed the stairs, the lamp trembling in my hand, and checked the light. It burned steady, but the air was wrong. Too cold, too still. As I turned to leave, I heard it again. A scrape. Closer now, from below. I froze, my pulse hammering. Then a low chuckle, unmistakable, echoing up the spiral stairs. Lenny's voice. I found him in the living area, sitting in the dark, his silhouette massive against the window. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, not turning around. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like a blade hidden in cloth. "Thought I heard something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed again, soft and wrong. "Island plays tricks, Winslow. Stick to your job." I nodded, backing away, and didn't sleep again that night. By the fourth day, I was unraveling. The whispers were constant now, not just at night, but in the quiet moments, hissings and murmurs just beyond understanding. I caught glimpses of movement in the corners of my vision, a shadow flitting across the wall, a shape in the fog outside. Lenny noticed my jumpiness and grinned, his teeth yellow in the lantern light. "You're hearing them, aren't you?" he said over dinner. "The ghosts." I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. He leaned closer, his breath sour. "They're always here, watching, waiting." He tapped his fork against the table, a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Keep the light burning, kid. Keeps them at bay." That night, I barricaded the door to the living area with a chair. It didn't help. The whispers grew into voices, sharp, overlapping, begging or warning, I couldn't tell. I curled up on the cot, hands over my ears until exhaustion pulled me under. I woke to a sensation faint but unmistakable, something brushing my bare toes, tickling like a feather or a breath. My eyes snapped open. Lenny was there, crouched beside my cot, his face inches from my feet. His eyes were wide, unblinking, his teeth bared in a grin that wasn't human. He was gnawing softly at the flesh around my navel, his lips slick with spit and blood. I screamed, kicking wildly and tore free, pain searing my side. Blood soaked my shirt as I stumbled to the door, the chair clattering aside. The storm roared outside, rain blinding me as I ran across the landing. Lenny's laughter chased me, low and guttural, merging with the wind. I reached the dock, my hands shaking as I untied the boat. The waves fought me, but I rowed, my side burning, until the lighthouse was a faint glow in the fog. By sunrise, I collapsed on the mainland shore, my clothes soaked in blood and seawater. I flagged down a passing trucker who called the police. When the authorities arrived at Gull's Tooth, they found the lighthouse empty. Lenny was gone, the boat still tied to the dock. But in the basement, behind that rusted iron door, they found 3 bodies, old, decayed, half buried in the dirt. The police said they'd been there for years, maybe decades. The ad, the job, the island, it was all a trap. Lenny wasn't just a keeper. He was something else. Something that fed on more than stories. Story 2. The Fog. At Cliff's End. My name is Thomas Hale, and I've been the keeper of Cliff's End Lighthouse for 10 years. It's a lonely post on a jagged outcrop in the Pacific Northwest, where the ocean chews at the rocks and the fog is so thick you can choke on it. The lighthouse is old, its stone walls pitted by salt and time, standing 70 feet above the waves on a cliff that drops straight into the sea. I came here for the solitude, for the rhythm of the work, tending the lens, winding the old mechanisms, keeping the beacon alive. But something's out there in the fog, and it's been trying to get in for years. It started small, so small I thought I was imagining it. My first year, I'd hear a faint tap, tap, tap on the window of my quarters at exactly 11:15 p.m. The sound was soft, like a finger testing the glass, but my room is high up in the tower, far above the reach of any man or beast. I'd check the window, my breath fogging the cold pane, and see nothing but the gray wall of mist outside. The fog here is relentless, swallowing the horizon, muffling the world. I told myself it was just the wind, or the old building settling, or my mind playing tricks in the isolation. But it happened every night, always at 11:15, never a minute off. By my 3rd year, I stopped checking the window. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the taps until they stopped, usually 3, sometimes 4, never more. I'd gotten used to it, or so I thought. Then came the night the foghorn failed. It was a cold spring evening, the kind where the air feels like it's holding its breath. The horn, a deep bellow that could rattle your bones, just stopped. Mid-note, it choked off into silence. I climbed the spiral stairs to the service room, my boots echoing on the iron steps, and found the mechanism intact. No obvious fault. I restarted it, and it roared back to life. But as I turned to leave, I saw something through the lens house window. A shadow, tall, impossibly thin, like a man stretched until his limbs were wrong. It stood just beyond the beam's reach, half hidden in the fog. I froze, my heart hammering as the figure turned its head. Its gaze locked onto me, cold and heavy, like a predator sizing up prey. The beam swept past, and it was gone. I stood there for an hour, staring into the fog, but saw nothing else. The foghorn didn't fail again that night, but I didn't sleep. I started locking the doors after that. The lighthouse has 3. The main entrance at the base, the service room, and the lantern room. Heavy iron things, built to withstand storms and time. I'd check them twice before bed, sliding the bolts home with a satisfying clunk. But the tapping continued, and soon other things started happening. Scratches inside the walls, faint at first, like claws skittering over stone. They'd come from my bedroom wall, always after the taps, moving upward as if something were climbing inside the masonry. I tore apart the paneling one day, expecting rats or rot, but found nothing, just cold, solid stone. The radio was next. It's an old set, meant for emergencies, but I'd use it to pick up weather reports or the occasional crackly voice from a passing ship. One night, as I fiddled with the dial, a voice broke through the static. Not a sailor, not a weatherman. It was low, guttural, a chorus of whispers layered over each other. "Let us in," it said. "We're cold. Let us in." I yanked the plug from the wall, my hands shaking, but the words lingered in my head. I checked the radio the next day, thinking it was a prank or a crossed signal. It worked fine, but I never plugged it in again. The years blurred after that. The tapping, the scratches, the whispers, they became part of the rhythm of the place, like the crash of waves or the groan of the foghorn. I stopped writing about them in the logbook. The words felt too real on paper, like admitting they were more than my imagination. I focused on the work, polishing the lens, oiling the gears, keeping the light burning, but the fog never let me forget. It pressed against the windows, thick and gray, like it was waiting for a crack to slip through. Last winter, things got worse. A storm rolled in, one of the worst I'd seen. The wind screamed, rattling the tower, and the sea churned below like it wanted to swallow the cliff whole. The light started flickering, which it's not supposed to do. It's a modern system backed by a generator, but that night it sputtered like a candle in a draft. I was in the lantern room checking the wiring when I felt it, a pressure like the air itself was watching me. I looked out the window, and there they were, dozens of them, humanoid shapes, indistinct in the swirling fog, drifting just beyond the glass. They weren't solid, not like you or me, but they weren't shadows either. Their forms flickered like flames caught in a wind, and their mouths, God, their mouths were wrong, stretched wide, too wide, like gashes carved into their faces, humming a low, guttural note that vibrated in my chest. One of them pressed closer, its long, spindly hand flattening against the glass. Its fingers were too long, the joints bending at angles that made my stomach turn. It left a smear of something dark and oily, glistening in the light's beam. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps, and barricaded the lantern room door with a chair and a crate of spare parts. The light flickered again, then died completely, plunging me into darkness. The hum grew louder, seeping through the walls, and I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Not on the window this time, but on the door. Slow, deliberate, like it was testing the lock. I sat there, clutching a wrench, until dawn broke and the fog thinned. When I checked the lantern room, The light was working again, as if nothing had happened. But the oily smear was still on the glass, and the chair I'd used to brace the door was splintered, like something had pushed against it with impossible force. I don't know what they are. I don't know why they're here or why they want in, but they're out there every night, waiting in the fog. Last night I heard them again, their whispers clearer now, curling through the static of my unplugged radio. You can't keep us out forever. I've stopped sleeping. I keep the lantern room locked, the light burning, but I know it's only a matter of time. The fog is thicker tonight, pressing against the glass, and the tapping has started again. It's 11:15 p.m., and they're here. Story 3, The Strangest Lighthouse. Around the lighthouse had haunted my dreams since I was a kid. A jagged spire of rusted iron and cracked glass. It stood alone on a barren rock 20 miles off the coast, alien and unreachable, like something dropped from another world. I'd stare at it through my dad's old telescope, its silhouette cutting the horizon like a blade. No one talked about it. Fishermen avoided it. Charts marked it with vague warnings. Hazardous zone, restricted. But I couldn't look away. Years later, broke and desperate, I found the ad buried in the classifieds of a crumbling newspaper. Hiring now. Lighthouse keeper. Remote location. Immediate start. No experience required. The coordinates matched that lonely spire. I didn't hesitate. I sent my application, name, address, a single line about my willingness to work, and got a reply within hours. A boat would pick me up at dawn. No interview, no questions, just a curt instruction. Bring nothing. The boat was a rusted trawler, its engine coughing like a dying animal. The agent who met me at the dock was a gaunt man in a gray coat, his eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. He didn't introduce himself, just gestured for me to climb aboard. As we cut through the fog, waves slapping the hull, he spoke only once, his voice low and flat. You're on that island until the job's done. No leaving, no visitors, you understand? I nodded, my stomach twisting. The lighthouse loomed closer, its shape warped by the mist. Up close it was uglier than I'd imagined. Corroded metal plates bolted unevenly, windows smeared with grime, the beacon's glass dome fractured like a spiderweb. The island itself was a slab of black rock, slick with seaweed and pocked with shallow pools that smelled of decay. I stepped off the boat, and the agent was gone without a word, the trawler vanishing into the fog. The only person waiting was Bill, the veteran keeper. He was a bear of a man, grizzled and weathered, his beard streaked with gray. His eyes were hard, like he'd seen too much and stopped caring. "Winslow, right?" he grunted, tossing me a key ring heavy with rusted keys. "Don't lose these, and don't touch anything I don't tell you to." The lighthouse's interior was a maze of narrow corridors and creaking stairs. My room was a cell-like space with a cot, a sink, and a single bulb flickering overhead. The air was damp, heavy with the stench of salt and something fouler, like rotting meat. Bill showed me the basics: the generator, the logbook, the beacon controls. "Keep the light on," he said, "no matter what. It's the only thing keeping them at bay." "Them?" I asked. He didn't answer, just pointed me to the kitchen. Dinner was a can of beans heated over a gas stove. The tin cup I drank from smelled wrong, like sulfur and bile. I gagged but swallowed it down, chalking it up to the island's stale air. Bill watched me eat, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest," he said finally. "You'll need it. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The lighthouse groaned under the wind's assault, and the beacon's hum vibrated through the walls. Around midnight, an alarm blared, a shrill, pulsing wail that made my teeth ache. I stumbled to the control room, where a red light flashed on a panel labeled Perimeter Breach. Bill was already there, staring out the window. "Stay calm," he muttered. "It's just a Class 2. I followed his gaze. Below, on the rocky shore, something moved. It wasn't human. It crawled on all fours, its limbs bending at wrong angles, its skin gray and peeling like wet paper. The thing had no jaw. Its mouth was a gaping hole, teeth jutting inward. It dragged itself toward the lighthouse, leaving a trail of black sludge. "Jesus," I whispered. Bill handed me a rifle, its barrel scratched and heavy. "Aim for the chest. Don't waste bullets." My hands shook as I leaned out the window. The thing was closer now, its eyeless face tilting upward as if it could sense me. I fired. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, and the creature's head snapped back, but it kept coming. I fired again, center mass. The thing convulsed, collapsing into a heap, but then it laughed, a wet, gurgling cackle that echoed in my skull. Bill cursed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." He tossed me a coil of cable with a loop at the end like a snare. "Get it alive." I didn't question him. Adrenaline took over. I ran down the spiral stairs, out into the freezing night. The thing was still twitching, its laughter now a low rasp. I threw the snare over its neck and yanked, dragging it across the rocks. It thrashed, clawing at the cable, but I held tight. "You're mine now," I snarled, hauling it into the lighthouse's basement. The basement was a concrete bunker with 6 iron cells. 5 were occupied. The things inside were like the one I'd caught, gray, broken, their bodies twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. They didn't move, just stared through the bars with empty sockets. I locked the new one in the 6th cell, its cackling fading to a hiss. Bill was waiting upstairs. "You wasted 2 bullets," he said, his voice cold. "Class 2s don't need shooting. They're weak. A snare's enough." "What the hell are they?" I demanded, my hands still shaking. "Shades," he said. "This island's crawling with them. Class 2s are the least of it. Last keeper didn't listen. Got cocky. They found what was left of him in pieces." I didn't sleep after that. My shoulder ached from the rifle's kick, and my mind replayed the Shade's laugh. At dawn, I sat on the cot, sipping water from the same foul-smelling cup. Bill found me there, his face grim. "You handled a Class 2, he said. "That's nothing. Worse ones come at night. You'll see." The days blurred. By day, we cleaned the beacon, checked the generator, logged weather patterns. The island was silent, but the air felt wrong, like it was watching. At night, the alarms screamed. Class 2s were common, crawling things that hissed and laughed. We snared them, locked them away. The cells filled fast. I stopped counting after the 10th. One night, the alarm didn't sound. Instead, a low hum vibrated through the floor like the lighthouse itself was breathing. Bill's face went pale. "Class 3, he whispered. He grabbed a heavier rifle from a locked cabinet, its barrel etched with strange symbols. "Stay behind me." We climbed to the beacon room. The hum grew louder, joined by a scratching sound like claws on metal. Outside, the fog was thick, but I saw it. A shape taller than a man, its body a mass of writhing tendrils, each tipped with a glinting spike. It clung to the lighthouse's side, scaling the iron like a spider. Its face was a blank oval, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, glistening skin. Bill fired. The shot echoed, and the thing screeched, a sound that made my ears bleed. It didn't fall. It moved faster. I grabbed a flare gun from the wall, firing blindly. The flare hit its mark, and the creature burst into flames, tumbling into the sea. The smell of burning flesh lingered for hours. "You're learning," Bill said, but there was no praise in his voice. "Class 3s are rare, but there's worse, always worse." He was right. The next night, the hum returned, louder, deeper. The alarm stayed silent. I checked the panel. Nothing. Bill was already at the window, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Class 4, he said, his voice barely audible. "Don't look at it. Just run." I didn't listen. I looked. The thing was massive, a hulking shadow that blocked the horizon. It didn't crawl or climb. It glided, its body a patchwork of mismatched limbs, some human, some not. Its head was a cluster of eyes, hundreds of them, rolling and blinking in unison. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Bill yanked me back. "Move!" We ran to the basement, barricading the door. The thing didn't follow, but its presence lingered, a pressure in the air that made my skin crawl. We stayed there until dawn, listening to the lighthouse groan under an unseen weight. Days turned to weeks. The shades kept coming. Class 2s, 3s, occasionally of 4. The cells were full, so we started chaining them in the generator room. Their hisses and cackles, a constant drone. Bill taught me tricks, how to spot a shade's class by its movement, how to aim for weak spots, how to ignore the voices that sometimes whispered my name from the fog. But he never explained why they were here or what they wanted. "Doesn't matter," he'd say, "just keep the light on." One night, the beacon flickered, not failed, just dimmed for a second. The hum started instantly, louder than ever. Bill didn't speak, just handed me a machete and a flare gun. "Class 5, he said, "if it gets in, we're done." We stood at the beacon, watching the fog swirl. The thing came slowly, its shape indistinct, but massive, filling the horizon. It didn't make a sound, but the air grew heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. My hand shook as I gripped the machete. Bill's face was stone, but I saw fear in his eyes for the first time. The light flickered again. The thing moved closer. I could feel it now, a presence that pressed against my mind, cold and ancient. Bill whispered, "Keep the light on, no matter what." I didn't look at it. I couldn't. I focused on the beacon, my hands fumbling with the controls. The hum grew deafening, the lighthouse shaking like it would collapse. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The light steadied. The fog cleared. Whatever it was gone. Bill slumped against the wall, his breath ragged. "You did good, Winslow," he said. "But that was just a scout. They'll be back." I didn't ask who they were. I didn't need to. The island was alive with them, shades of every class waiting in the dark. We survived another night, but the lighthouse felt smaller, the walls thinner. The beacon burned, but its light seemed weaker. Story 4, The Horror at Flannan Lighthouse, December 8th, 1900. The wind howls like a living thing, clawing at the lighthouse on Island Moor. The Flannan Isles are a desolate place, a jagged scar of rock in the Atlantic's maw. I, Thomas Marshall, keeper of this forsaken light, write to keep my wits. The storm has raged for days, gray skies bleeding into endless rain. The sea churns below, spitting foam against the cliffs. My mates, James and Donald, are steady men, but even they feel the weight of this place, The isolation creeps into your bones, makes you hear things in the wind, whispers that aren't there, or so I tell myself. The light must stay burning. We check the oil, trim the wicks, and climb the spiral stairs to the lantern room. The glass rattles in its frame, and the beam cuts through the fog, frail against the storm's fury. James mutters about the cold, his breath clouding in the air. Donald's quieter, staring out at the waves like they might swallow us whole. I can't shake the feeling that something's watching from the dark. December 9th, 1900. The storm grows worse. The wind screams now, a relentless wail that shakes the walls. Rain hammers the lighthouse, seeping through cracks we can't find. The logbook's pages are damp, ink smearing under my pen. We take turns at the watch, but the hours blur. Sleep is a stranger here. I dream of faces in the waves, pale and eyeless, mouths gaping like fish. I wake to the same roar of the sea, the same gray light. James is restless, pacing the kitchen. He says the island feels wrong, like it's alive. Donald laughs it off, but his eyes dart to the windows. I check the stores. Dried fish, bread, tea, enough for weeks. But it feels like a lie. The island doesn't want us here. I caught myself staring at the cliffs today, wondering what it would feel like to step off. Madness, I know, but this place plants such thoughts. December 10th, 1900. Something's changed. The air is heavier, thick with a smell like wet iron. The storm hasn't let up, but it's different now. Less chaotic, more focused, like it's circling us. I heard a sound today, faint, under the wind's howl. A scream, high and sharp, carried from the sea. I ran to the cliff's edge, searching the waves. Nothing but foam and shadow. James and Donald didn't hear it, or so they claimed. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. We checked the perimeter at dusk, our boots slipping on wet rock. The sea was wild, waves crashing higher than I've ever seen. I swear I saw something white in the water, bobbing just beyond the breakers. A shape, human-like, but too pale, too still. I blinked, and it was gone. Donald clapped my shoulder, told me it was just the foam, but his hand trembled. December 11th, 1900. The lighthouse feels smaller tonight, the walls closing in. The wind is a constant roar, but there's something else beneath it, a low hum like a voice too deep to understand. James hasn't spoken all day. He sits by the fire, staring at nothing. Donald's no better. He keeps checking the locks, though there's no one out here but us. I found a crack in the lantern room glass today, hairline, but new. The beam still turns, but it feels weaker, like the light's being swallowed. I keep thinking about that scream, that white shape in the waves. I didn't tell the others. They're on edge enough. I'm writing this by lamplight, and the shadows seem to move when I'm not looking. I need to sleep, but the idea of closing my eyes terrifies me. December 12th, 1900. The storm is a monster now. It tore the shed door off its hinges, scattered our tools across the rocks. We did a perimeter check at noon, fighting the wind every step. The cliffs were treacherous, slick with rain and seaweed. That's when I heard it again. A woman's scream, distant but clear, rising over the waves. I froze, heart pounding. James and Donald were ahead, shouting over the gale, but they didn't hear it. I scanned the sea, and there it was again. Something white, floating, too deliberate to be debris. It vanished before I could point it out. By evening, things got stranger. I found James in the old stone chapel, a crumbling ruin near the cliffs. He was standing in the center, stark naked, his clothes in a pile at his feet. His eyes were glassy, like he was sleepwalking. I shook him, shouted his name, but he just blinked and mumbled. He didn't know how he got there. I dragged him back to the lighthouse, wrapped him in a blanket. He's still shivering, saying he feels hollow. Then, not an hour later, I found Donald outside the chapel door, naked as well, his skin pale as bone. He was staring at the sky, mouth slack. He didn't remember leaving the lighthouse. I got him inside, but the air feels wrong now, heavy with something I can't name. The wind doesn't just howl, it laughs. December 13th, 1900. I'm losing them. James and Donald barely speak, barely move. They sit in the kitchen, eyes unfocused, like puppets with cut strings. The storm hasn't stopped, but it's not just the storm anymore. Something's here, in the lighthouse, in the shadows. I see it in the corners of my vision, flickers of movement, shapes that vanish when I turn. The hum is louder now, vibrating in my chest. I checked the chapel again, alone this time. The air inside was cold, sharper than outside. The stones felt alive, pulsing under my hands. I found scratches on the walls, fresh and deep, like claws had torn through. I didn't tell the others. They're too far gone to care. Tonight, I caught Donald wandering again, half-dressed, heading for the chapel. I followed, keeping my distance. The wind was deafening, but I heard it. Whispers, dozens of them overlapping in the dark. I hid behind a broken wall and watched. Figures emerged from the shadows, pale and thin, their movements jerky. Women, or something like women, their hair long and tangled, their eyes black pits. They surrounded Donald, who stood frozen, his shirt hanging in tatters. They tore at him, ripping the rest of his clothes away, pinning him to the ground. Then it came. A shadow loomed over the chapel, 8 feet tall, black as pitch with eyes like burning coals. Wings, jagged and wrong, unfolded behind it. The women changed, their limbs twisting, teeth sharpening. They fell on Donald, clawing, tearing. I saw his flesh peel away, his blood pooling on the stones. They ripped out his insides, a frenzied feast, their mouths red and glistening. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The winged thing watched, its eyes locked on me like it knew I was there. December 14th, 1900. Dawn broke, gray and merciless. The chapel is a slaughterhouse. Donald's remains are scattered, bones, sinew, scraps of skin. James is gone too. I found his coat near the cliffs, but no sign of him. The storm rages on, the hum louder than ever. I'm alone now, the lighthouse creaking like it's alive. I keep seeing them, the women in every shadow. Their faces flicker in the lantern's glass, their mouths moving without sound. I can't stay here. Help is coming. They'll send a boat when they realize we've gone dark. But I can't face them, not with what I've seen. I dragged what was left of Donald to the skiff, bones clattering in a sack. James, wherever he is, I couldn't find. I'll row out, far from this cursed rock, and sink their remains in the sea. The fog is thick, swallowing the horizon. It's better this way, but there's something else, a memory, sharp and wrong, cutting through the fog in my mind. It wasn't just them, it was me. I see it now, clear as the blood on my hands. I gave Donald something in his tea, something to make him sleep. I remember the chapel, the women, their whispers urging me on. I remember my hands on him, tearing, gnawing, his screams lost in the storm, the blackness of his blood, the weight of his guts in my fingers. I did it. I ate him. The fog is in me now, twisting my thoughts. I write this to confess, to hold on to what's left of me. The skiff is ready. The sea will take us all. Whatever's out there, it's not done with me. Story 5, Deathly Silence at the Lighthouse. It was a dark and gloomy evening when I arrived at the lighthouse, the wind howling like a wounded beast across the jagged cliffs. The tower loomed before me, a gaunt silhouette against the bruised sky, its lantern dim and flickering as if reluctant to pierce the fog. I am James Harrow, the new keeper, lured here by a letter promising solitude and a steady wage. The words of that letter now feel like a cruel jest, for I am no longer able to define reality from this bizarre, constant, dreamy state of mind. The job seemed simple enough: tend the light, guide the ships, and keep the log. The portmaster had been vague, his eyes darting away when I asked about the previous keeper. "Gone," he muttered, "just gone." I thought little of it then, eager for the quiet of this remote outpost. But now, as I sit in this creaking tower, surrounded by the absolute silence of death, I know they tricked me into accepting this job and hid the cursed truth about this place. My first night was uneventful, though the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant crash of waves. I climbed the spiral steps to the lantern room, checked the oil, and polished the lens. The light spun its beam across the sea, a lifeline for sailors battling the treacherous currents. I did my duty well, and for a week all was calm. Then the strange occurrences began. It started with whispers, faint and formless, drifting through the walls at the darkest hour. I thought it was the wind at first, but the words were too deliberate, too human. "Leave," they hissed, "or stay forever." I searched the tower from top to bottom, finding nothing but damp stone and rusted iron. The logbook, left by my predecessor, was blank, save for a single scrawled line. "They come at night." No name, no date, just those 4 words written in a trembling hand. By the second week, I saw them. Shadows that moved against the logic of light. They flickered in the corners of my vision, humanoid but wrong, their limbs too long, their faces hollow. One night, as I tended the lantern, a figure stood at the edge of the beam's glow, motionless. Its eyes were empty sockets, its mouth a gaping void. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and when I blinked, it was gone. But the air grew colder, heavier, as if the tower itself resented my presence. I am at the mercy of these strange creatures of the night. They appear in the darkest hour, their forms coalescing from the fog that clings to the cliffs. I have seen many corpses of unfortunate sailors who drowned in the sea during violent storms, silently buried near the lighthouse. Their lifeless souls seem to possess this place, their hollow-eyed moans filling the night. I cling to the dim lantern for comfort, its weak glow my only anchor in this nightmare. One ghost, more distinct than the others, began to appear regularly. It was a skeletal figure, its skull grinning around a pipe clenched between its teeth. Unlike the others, it spoke clearly, its voice a dry rasp. "You're a fool to stay," it said, leaning against the wall of the lantern room. "They'll have you, boy, like they had me." I demanded answers, but it only laughed, a sound like cracking bone. "Leave this place, or you'll be a victim of these mean spirits forever." I tried to flee. The next morning, I packed my bag and descended the spiral steps, determined to reach the mainland. But at the base of the tower, a strange, mesmerizing force stopped me. My legs grew heavy, my mind clouded, as if the lighthouse itself willed me to stay. I stumbled back inside, the door slamming shut behind me. The ghost with the pipe was waiting, shaking its head. "Told you," it said, fading into the shadows. Each day grew more sinister. The creatures no longer hid. They crowded the stairwell, their whispers now screams, their faces inches from mine. I stopped sleeping, afraid to close my eyes lest they drag me into the dark. The logbook, once blank, began to fill with words I didn't write. You are ours. The light binds you. No escape. I tore out the pages, but they reappeared, the ink bleeding like wounds. I guided every ship to port, my duty the only thing keeping me sane. But even that was tainted. One night, the lantern's beam flickered, and in its light I saw a shipwreck on the rocks below, though none had been reported. Ghostly sailors clawed their way up the cliffs, their waterlogged flesh peeling as they reached for the tower. I barred the door, but their hands passed through, cold as the grave brushing my skin. The grinning skull with the pipe became my only companion, its mockery strangely comforting. "Burn it," it whispered one night, its eye sockets glinting. "It's the only way." I resisted at first, unwilling to destroy the beacon that saved lives. But as the spirits grew bolder, their fingers tightening around my heart, I knew I had no choice. Yesterday, I arrived with cans of gasoline from the supply shed, my hands trembling as I poured the fuel over the spiral steps. The smell was sharp, dizzying. I struck a match and watched the flames leap, devouring the wood and stone. I laughed like a madman to see the lighthouse collapse under the fire, the spirits shrieking as the inferno consumed them. For a moment, I thought I'd won, that the blaze had exorcised the fiends. But then, without warning, they turned on me. The air grew thick with their rage, their hollow eyes blazing red. They lifted me, their strength unnatural, and threw me into the fire. I burnt like charcoal, my screams echoing as the pitiless spirits laughed at my agony. The pain was endless, yet I didn't die, not fully. I felt my body crumble, but my mind lingered, trapped in the smoldering ruins. The lighthouse lies in ashes now. By dawn, the townsfolk extinguished the blaze, their faces pale as they sifted through the wreckage. They found no body, only charred stone and twisted metal. A year later, the lighthouse was rebuilt, its new lantern gleaming as if nothing had happened. A new keeper arrived today, his face bright with hope, blissfully unaware that a similar fate will join him. The spirits are quiet now, but I feel them watching. I am still here, bound to this cursed tower, my voice a whisper in the wind. The new keeper will hear me soon, just as I heard the one before. The lighthouse demands its due, and none who enter ever leave. Story 6. The Lighthouse Watch. The Baltic Sea roars tonight, its waves clawing at the jagged cliffs of Fiscost Island. The wind screams through the cracks of my weathered stone walls, a relentless howl that carries the weight of centuries. I am the lighthouse, the solitary sentinel of this forsaken place, and I feel the storm's fury as if it were my own. Below, in the keeper's quarters, Preston shivers. His breath catches in the dim flicker of a single candle, its flame trembling like his resolve. He thinks he's alone, but I am watching, always watching. Preston is young, barely past 20, with eyes that carry the burden of his family's legacy. The Hawthorns built me long ago, their fishing empire thriving until the sea turned cruel. Famine came first, then shipwrecks, each disaster etching scars into Fiscost's soul. The islanders whispered of curses, of an angry spirit in the cliffs. They weren't wrong. I was their beacon, meant to guide and protect. But the years have twisted me. Isolation does that. It festers. Preston feels it too, though he doesn't yet know the truth. I can't sleep, he mutters, glancing at the black sea beyond the window. The waves churn, their froth glinting like eyes in the dark. He thinks something out there watches him. He's right, but it's not the sea. It's me. The candle gutters, its light too weak against the storm's might. I creak under the wind's assault, my iron lantern room rattling above. Preston paces, his boots scuffing the worn floorboards. He doesn't know the stories the islanders told before they fled. Tales of keepers who vanished, of shadows that moved without light. His great-grandfather built me to save lives, but the sea and I have other plans. This place is cursed, Preston whispers, rubbing his arms against the chill. He's not wrong. The island and I are one, bound by time and tragedy, war, famine, storms. They've all bled into my stones. I am Fiskost, and Fiskost is me. The night deepens, and the storm grows fiercer. Rain lashes my walls, seeping through cracks I can no longer mend. Preston tries to relight the candle, his hand shaking as the wick refuses to catch. "Come on," he hisses, striking match after match. The darkness presses closer, heavy with my presence. I was built to burn bright, to guide ships through the fog. But I've learned to wield darkness too. It's easier to keep them here, to make them stay. Preston doesn't know it yet, but he belongs to me now. A gust slams against the keeper's quarters, and a window shatters. Glass scatters across the floor, and the wind howls through the gap, snuffing out the candle's frail light. Preston stumbles back, his breath sharp and panicked. "Who's there?" he calls, his voice swallowed by the storm. Foolish boy. No one answers but me, and I speak only in shadows. I feel his fear, sharp and alive, pulsing through the air. It feeds me, strengthens me. I was alone for so long, decades of empty nights, with only the sea's endless rage for company, but now I have him. He fumbles for the lantern, his fingers clumsy in the dark. "This isn't right," he mutters, his voice trembling. "The storm. It's too much." He thinks the weather is his enemy, but the storm is merely my ally. I am the true force here, the will that binds this island. Preston scrambles to the staircase, his footsteps echoing up my spiral core. He's heading for the lantern room, desperate to check the light. He thinks it's his duty, his purpose. He doesn't know I've already decided his fate. The lantern room is my heart. Its great glass lends my eye. The beacon burns, casting its beam across the churning sea. But it's a hollow gesture now. I no longer care for the ships that pass. They mean nothing to me. Preston bursts through the door, his face pale in the flickering light. He checks the oil, the wick, the gears. Everything is in order, yet he senses something wrong. "Why does it feel like this?" he whispers, his breath fogging the cold glass. He peers out at the horizon, but the sea offers no answers. Only I do. I let the wind howl louder, rattling the iron frame around us. Preston grips the railing, his knuckles white. "I'm losing my mind," he says, half to himself. He's not. He's simply beginning to feel me. I am in the creak of the floor, the groan of the walls, the flicker of the light. I am the island, the lighthouse, the storm, and I am lonely. Preston is like me, alone, carrying the weight of a family that no longer exists. His ancestors built me, but they abandoned me too. Now their last heir will stay forever. A shadow moves across the glass, and Preston spins, his eyes wide. "Who's there?" he shouts again. The wind answers with a scream, but I remain silent. I don't need words to claim him. The darkness is enough. I let it seep into the room, curling around him like smoke. He backs against the wall, his chest heaving. "This isn't real," he says, but his voice cracks. He knows it's real. He feels my presence, my anger, my need. I was built to save, but I've learned to destroy. Those who come here, who dare to call themselves keepers, must share my fate. The storm reaches its peak, the sea a writhing beast below. Preston stumbles down the stairs, his lantern flickering. He's searching for safety, but there's none to be found. I am everywhere. The walls groan as he passes, the air thick with my will. He reaches the keeper's quarters and barricades the door as if wood could keep me out. I just need to wait it out, he tells himself, piling chairs against the frame. Poor, foolish boy, there is no waiting me out. I am eternal. I let the darkness grow heavier, pressing against his mind. He sinks to the floor, clutching his head. "Stop it," he whispers. "Please, stop." But I won't. I can't. I've been alone too long, my light burning for no one. Preston is mine now, and I will keep him. The island demands it. I demand it. I let the shadows tighten, wrapping him in my embrace. His eyes widen, his breath a ragged gasp. "No," he chokes out, but it's too late. I engulf him in my darkness, claiming him as I have so many others. He will not leave. He will not escape. He will be forgotten, just as the world has forgotten me. Dawn creeps over the horizon, pale and weak against the storm's lingering wrath. The sea calms, but I remain. I am always here, watching, waiting. Preston is gone, his soul woven into my stones, his fear a quiet hum in my walls. The lighthouse stands silent, its beam cutting through the morning mist. Another keeper will come. They always do, and I will be here, waiting for the next resident among you. The storm rages on, and I hold my dark secret. Story 7. The Lighthouse Keeper's Lament. The sea was a restless beast that summer, clawing at the cliffs below the ramshackle cottage where I'd come to stay with my Aunt Annie and Uncle Tom. I was 16, skinny and awkward, sent to the south coast for a change of air after a long winter of my mother's illness. The cottage perched on a jagged outcrop, its peeling paint and creaking beams a testament to years battered by salt and wind. My attic room had a single window facing the ocean, framing a view of endless gray waves and, in the distance, the silhouette of an old lighthouse, its lantern long dark. Uncle Tom, a gruff man with hands like weathered oak, clapped me on the shoulder when I arrived. "Plenty to do on the south coast for a young lad like you, Jess," he said, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't place. "Just mind the cliffs, they're risky." Aunt Annie was kinder, her face lined with worry that seemed older than her years. As we unpacked my things, she glanced out the window toward the lighthouse and frowned. "That old tower is unstable," she said, her voice low. "You're not to go near it, Jess. It's dangerous." I nodded, but the lighthouse drew my eye, its crumbling stone stark against the sky. The ocean's roar filled the air, a sound that was both home and dread, pulling at something deep inside me. That first night, a storm brewed. The wind howled, rattling the window panes, and I lay in bed, the attic creaking above me. Sleep was just taking hold when a low, mournful wail cut through the night. A foghorn. Though Aunt Annie had said the lighthouse had been silent for decades, the sound was wrong, too deep, too alive, like a cry from the sea itself. I sat up, heart pounding, and peered out the window. The fog was thick, curling like smoke over the waves, and for a moment I saw him. A gaunt figure in a long coat, standing on the cliff's edge, staring out to sea. His face was shadowed, but his sorrow was palpable, heavy as the salt in the air. I blinked, and he was gone. Aunt Annie's footsteps creaked up the stairs. She burst into the room, her nightgown fluttering, and yanked the window shut. "You're not to go near that lighthouse," she said again, her voice sharp. "Promise me, Jess." I mumbled my agreement, but the foghorn's wail lingered in my ears, unsettling me as I tried to sleep. The next night it came again, not just the foghorn, but a song, faint, eerie, like a woman's voice woven into the wind. It drifted from the dark cove below the cliffs, pulling at me, urging me to follow. I clutched my blanket, trying to block it out, but the window slammed open, the latch snapping under the force of the gale. The foghorn howled louder now, and a voice whispered behind me, soft as a sigh, "Don't be frightened." I froze. The air turned cold, thick with the stench of rotting fish and damp wool. Slowly, I turned. There, pressed against the foot of my bed, was the figure from the cliff. His face was hollow, eyes sunken like tide pools, and his long coat dripped with seawater. Edward Halloran, the last keeper of the lighthouse, or so I'd later learn. His presence filled the room with a grief so heavy it pressed against my chest. "The souls that have died weep to be reunited with the living," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "I have to go to her. I'll take the sea for her, my lad." His words carried an ache that made my throat tighten, a longing for someone lost. "His twin sister, Helen," he said, his voice breaking on her name. Each cry of the foghorn seemed to deepen his torment, and his tears fell cold on my skin, drowning me in his loneliness. I screamed, diving under the covers, heart hammering as the stench and the weight of his sorrow suffocated me. When I peeked out, he was gone, but the foghorn's wail echoed in my ears, and the window rattled as if trying to open itself. Morning came, gray and heavy. Over breakfast, Aunt Annie's hands trembled as she poured tea. "Just a bad dream," she said when I told her, but her eyes darted to Uncle Tom, who stared at his plate. "That foghorn's just an old sound carried on the wind," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Aunt Annie hesitated, then spoke softly of Richard and Helen Greaves, twins who had tended the lighthouse long ago. Both had died at sea, she said, their boat lost in a storm. Family history, she called it, but her words felt like a warning. I couldn't shake the image of Edward's face, his grief like a tide pulling me under. That afternoon, I wandered to the cemetery behind the village, a windswept place where the headstones tilted toward the sea. Aunt Annie had mentioned the twins' graves, and I found Helen's easily, a small weathered stone that read simply, "Helen Greaves, beloved." The air grew heavy, and that same stench of sea decay rose from the earth. I knelt, placing a wild flower on the grave, and felt a chill crawl up my spine. Edward was there again, his gaunt form looming behind me, his eyes fixed on the stone. "I must go to her," he whispered. "One soul torn in two. Can you not feel her?" His longing crashed over me, a wave of sorrow so deep I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs wouldn't move. "Jess!" Aunt Annie's voice cut through the fog. Sharp and desperate, I spun, stumbling toward her, through the mist, shouting her name. When I looked back, Edward was gone, the cemetery empty save for the wind. That night, the storm returned, fiercer than before. Thunder shook the cottage, and rain lashed the windows. I lay awake, the foghorn's wail blending with the siren song from the cove. A cold hand closed around mine, tugging gently. It was Edward, his eyes hollow, but urgent. "Come," he whispered, leading me from my bed. I don't know why I followed, fear, curiosity, or something deeper, but I did, down the stairs, out into the storm. The wind tore at my clothes as we reached the forbidden beach below the cliffs, the cave's mouth gaping like a wound in the earth. Lightning flashed, and in its glow I saw her, my mother, frail and pale, her face lit with the same gentle smile she'd worn before her illness took her. She reached out, touching my cheek, her fingers warm despite the cold. "You're growing strong, Jess," she said, her voice a whisper over the waves. Pride shone in her eyes, and for a moment I felt whole. Then Edward's voice broke through, soft but heavy with warning. "Such pain is not for a lad so young. You've had your goodbye. 'Tis something I never had." He stepped toward the surf, the waves clawing at his coat. I screamed his name as a towering wave rose, black and angry, and crashed over him. He vanished, swallowed by the sea, and the foghorn fell silent. The storm's fury broke the cliffs that night. By dawn I was shivering on the beach, Uncle Tom's arms around me, a scruffy rescue dog he'd found licking my face. The lighthouse lay in ruins, its stones scattered across the shore, the tide washing over the debris. The council demolished what remained in the weeks that followed, and Aunt Annie and Uncle Tom kept me close, their warmth a shield against the cold of that night. Years later, I built a life far from that coast, but the sea never left me. I named my children Richard and Helen, a quiet nod to the twins whose grief had haunted me. On my mantel sits a snow globe, a tiny lighthouse trapped in the glass, its light forever still. Sometimes, when the wind howls, I hear a faint wail, like a foghorn calling across the years. And I wonder if Edward ever found his Helen, or if the sea still holds them both. Story 8. The Vanishing of the Flannan Isles. The sky was a bruise heavy with storm clouds as the boat rocked toward Island Moor. I, Thomas Marshall, gripped the rail, my knuckles white against the salt-sprayed wood. The Flannan Isle loomed ahead, a jagged scar of rock crowned by a lone lighthouse. Its silhouette stood stark against the churning gray, a silent sentinel that hadn't flashed in days. The ship's log had been clear, the light was dead, and no word had come from the keepers, James, William, and Edward. My mate, Joe Moore, stood beside me, his face grim as he scanned the horizon. "Something's wrong?" Joe muttered, his voice nearly lost to the wind. "No smoke, no signal, nothing." I nodded, my stomach twisting. The Flannan Isles were no stranger to tales, whispers of vanishings, of men swallowed by the sea or something worse. I'd laughed them off in the mainland's warmth, but here, with the island's cliffs glowering down, those stories felt heavier. We anchored near the rocky shore, the waves clawing at our small boat. The path to the lighthouse was steep, slick with spray and seaweed. The tower itself was a squat, whitewashed structure, its lantern room dark and lifeless. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a spiral staircase that wound into shadow. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of damp stone, and something sharper, something metallic. "James? William?" Joe called, his voice echoing. No answer came, only the distant crash of waves. We climbed to the living quarters, our boots heavy on the iron steps. The room was a frozen moment. A tin mug on the table, a chair tipped over, a coat slung across a bunk. A logbook lay open, its pages yellowed and curling. I brushed the dust away, my fingers trembling, as I read the last entries. December 12th. The sea is restless, strange lights on the horizon, not ships, not stars. Edward swears he saw a shadow move across the cliffs, but there's nothing there. He's not sleeping. December 13th. The wind howls like a beast. William says he heard voices last night calling from the rocks. We checked at dawn, nothing but gulls. The light flickered twice, though none of us touched it. December 14th. It's here. We saw it. Not human, not animal. It moved in the fog, watching us. Edward won't leave the lantern room. He says it's waiting. The words ended in a jagged scrawl, as if the pen had been ripped from the writer's hand. My mouth went dry. Joe, peering over my shoulder, cursed under his breath. "They was scared," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Something got to them." Joe's eyes darted to the window where the storm clouds pressed closer. "Let's check the lantern room. Maybe they left something else." The lantern room was a glass cage, its massive lens dulled by grime. The wick was cold, the oil untouched, but on the floor, scratched into the wood, were frantic marks, lines and curves that formed no recognizable shape. They seemed to pulse under my gaze like a heartbeat trapped in the grain. "Thomas," Joe said, his voice tight. He pointed to the glass. Beyond it, the sea churned, and for a moment I swore I saw something, a flicker of movement, too large, too fast to be a wave. It vanished before I could blink. "Let's get the light working," I said, trying to steady my voice. "That's what we're here for." We set to work, cleaning the lens, refilling the oil. But the air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. Shadows seemed to shift in the corners, though the storm's dim light barely reached them. Joe's hands shook as he lit the wick, and when the flame caught, it flared too bright, casting jagged shadows across the walls. That's when I felt it, a pull, like a tide dragging me under. The room blurred, and suddenly I wasn't in the lighthouse anymore. I stood on the rocky shore, rain lashing my face, the wind screaming in my ears. 3 figures huddled before me, James, William, and Edward. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with terror. Lightning cracked, illuminating a shape in the distance rising from the sea. It was vast, formless, a writhing mass of shadow that pulsed with unnatural life. One of them, Edward, I think, screamed, "It's coming for us!" His voice was swallowed by the darkness. I blinked, and I was back in the lantern room, my hands gripping the railing. Joe stared at me, his face ashen. "What the hell was that, Thomas? You were just standing there staring at nothing." "I saw them," I whispered. "The keepers. They were on the shore. Something was out there with them." Joe grabbed my arm. "We need to leave now." But the lighthouse seemed to hum, a low vibration that rattled my bones. The logbook's words burned in my mind. "It's waiting." I stumbled back to the living quarters, my heart pounding. The diary lay where I'd left it, but the pages were different now. New words sprawled across them, written in a hand that wasn't mine or the keeper's. "It sees you, Thomas. It knows your name." I slammed the book shut, my breath ragged. "Joe, we're not alone here?" He didn't answer. I turned to find him staring at the window, his face frozen. Outside, the storm had worsened, but something else was there. A shadow, vast and shifting, pressed against the glass. It wasn't fog or rain. It moved with purpose, its edges curling like tendrils. "Joe!" I grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back. The shadow vanished, but the air grew colder, sharp enough to sting my lungs. The lighthouse groaned, as if the stones themselves were straining. "We can't stay," Joe said, his voice breaking. "We'll signal the ship at dawn." But dawn felt impossibly far. The night pressed in, and the lighthouse seemed to tighten around us. Every creak of the floor, every gust against the walls, felt like a warning. I returned to the logbook, unable to resist its pull. The pages were heavier now, the words shifting as I read. It never leaves. It waits in the deep, in the stone, in the air. It takes what it wants. I read aloud, my voice trembling. It was not a storm that took the keepers, but something far darker, something that defied explanation. The room grew colder still, the shadows deepening. A faint whisper curled through the air, not words, but a sound like distant waves, like voices just beyond hearing. Joe was at the door checking the lock, his hands fumbling. "We're trapped," he muttered. "The door, it's stuck." I joined him, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The wood felt alive, pulsing under my fingers. The whispers grew louder, weaving through the walls, accompanied by the cry of seabirds, or something mimicking them. "Show yourself," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The air answered with a low hum, a vibration that crawled up my spine. The logbook fell open again, its pages flipping on their own. The final entry glowed under the flickering lamp. "You cannot leave. It has chosen you." Panic clawed at my chest. I grabbed Joe, dragging him toward the stairs. "We're getting to the boat, now." The staircase spiraled down into darkness, the walls seeming to close in. Every step echoed with that unnatural hum, growing louder, more insistent. At the base of the stairs, the door to the outside was ajar, but beyond it, the storm raged with a fury I hadn't seen before. The sea was a writhing mass, and in its depths I saw it again, that shape, vast and alive, watching us. Joe pushed past me, sprinting for the boat. I followed, slipping on the wet rocks, the wind tearing at my clothes. The boat was still there, tethered to the shore, but as we reached it, the rope snapped and the craft lurched into the waves. Joe screamed, lunging for it, but the sea swallowed it whole. We stood on the shore, soaked and shivering, the lighthouse looming behind us. The hum was everywhere now, in the air, in the ground, in my skull. I turned back to the tower, its silhouette black against the storm. The lantern room flickered, not with light, but with something else, a pulse of shadow that seemed to beckon. "Thomas," Joe whispered, his voice small, "it's not letting us go." I looked at him, then at the sea, where the shape still lingered, its edges bleeding into the horizon. The island felt alive, its rocks and waves part of something vast and unknowable. I whispered a silent hope, praying I wouldn't vanish like the others, that I wouldn't become another name in the Flannan legend. But as the last rays of sunlight disappeared, I felt the island's hold tighten, and I knew escape was not promised. Story 9, The Ghost of Small's Light. I am Thomas Howell, keeper of Small's Light, a lonely tower perched on a jagged rock 20 miles from shore. The year is 1801, and the sea is a merciless beast, clawing at the stones below with frothy rage. The wind howls like a living thing, rattling the iron bolts of the lighthouse door. My only companion is Thomas Griffith, a gruff man with a temper as foul as the storms that trap us here. We are two souls bound by duty, but our words are sharp, our patience worn thin by the endless crash of waves, and the suffocating isolation of this forsaken place. Tonight, December's chill seeps through the stone walls. I climb the spiral stairs to the lantern room, my boots echoing in the hollow tower. The lamp's flame flickers, casting shadows that dance like specters on the curved glass. I scan the black horizon, a void where sea and sky bleed into one. Griffith is below, coughing again, a wet, ragged sound that carries up the stairs. We argued earlier over rations, over the damp wood that refuses to burn, over nothing at all. His eyes burned with resentment, and I felt the weight of his gaze long after he turned away. The days blur into weeks, each storm fiercer than the last. By January, the sea is a cauldron of fury, waves smashing against the rocks with enough force to shake the tower. Griffith's cough worsens. His face is pale, his breath shallow. I raise a distress flag, its red cloth flapping wildly in the gale, but the horizon remains empty. No help comes. I tend to him as best I can, bringing broth and blankets, but his fever climbs. Each night, I climb the stairs to keep the lamp burning, its light a frail pulse against the darkness. Each night, I hear his labored breathing below, a reminder of my helplessness. One morning, I find him still. His eyes stare at the ceiling, unseeing, his chest unmoving. The air is heavy with the stink of death. I kneel beside him, my hands trembling. The sea roars outside, mocking my grief. I cannot bury him. There is no earth here, only rock and water. I cannot cast his body into the sea, for when rescue comes, they'll think I killed him. Suspicion would be my noose. My mind races, panic clawing at my chest. I drag his body to the workshop, my arms aching under his weight. With splintered boards and rusted nails, I fashion a crude coffin, my hands bleeding from the effort. I lash it to the gallery outside the lantern room, where the wind screams and the spray stings my face. His corpse lies there, a grim sentinel, as the storms rage on. The first night alone is unbearable. The tower creaks, the lamp hisses, and the sea's endless roar fills my skull. I sit by the lantern, its light my only anchor, but in the quiet moments I hear it, a faint cough from below, sharp and wet like Griffith's. I freeze, my heart pounding. It's the wind, I tell myself, or the pipes groaning. Yet it comes again, deliberate, echoing up the spiral stairs. I grip the railing, staring into the dark shaft of the tower. Nothing moves. I force myself to tend the lamp, polishing the glass, trimming the wick, anything to keep my hands busy. But the sound lingers in my mind, a splinter I cannot pull free. Days pass, and the coffin sways in the wind outside. The smell creeps in, a sickly sweetness that clings to my throat. I avoid the gallery, but at night, when I must check the lamp, I feel it, eyes watching me. I glance at the coffin, its boards warped by the salt air. Griffith's face, bloated and gray, presses against the cracks, his dead eyes fixed on me. I stumble back, my breath ragged. It's a trick of the light, I tell myself, the storm playing with my mind. But when I close my eyes, I see him still, his gaze heavy with accusation. By the second week, I barely sleep. The coughing comes every night now, louder, closer, as if he's climbing the stairs. I lock the lantern room door, but the sound seeps through, a relentless rhythm that matches the waves. One night, I hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging across the gallery outside. My lantern casts a weak glow, and I see a shadow move past the glass, tall and hunched. I shout, my voice swallowed by the storm, but no one answers. The footsteps stop, and I hear a faint tap on the window like fingers brushing the brass frame. I don't look. I can't. I huddle by the lamp, its warmth a frail shield against the cold dread creeping up my spine. The third week breaks me. The smell is unbearable, the coffin's ropes fraying in the wind. I dream of Griffith standing over me, his face rotting, his mouth moving without sound. I wake screaming, my voice hoarse. The lamp burns low, and I scramble to refuel it, my hand shaking so badly I spill oil on the floor. That night, I hear the coughing again, but it's different, closer, inside the room. I spin around, the lantern casting wild shadows. A figure stands in the corner, half lit, its face hidden. "Griffith?" I whisper, my voice breaking. The figure doesn't move, but I feel its gaze, heavy and cold. I blink, and it's gone. The room is empty, but my skin crawls as if the air itself is watching. On the 21st day, the storm breaks. A rescue boat appears, a speck on the horizon. I wave frantically, my throat raw from shouting. The sailors dock, their faces grim as they climb the tower. They find me in the lantern room, shivering, my eyes hollow. The smell hits them first, and they see the coffin lashed to the gallery. They don't ask questions. They break open the door, and I collapse, my hands covering my face. I remember nothing of the boat, only waking in a bed on shore, the sea's roar finally silent. But Small's light does not forget. Years later, after the tower is automated, fishermen whisper of strange sights. On stormy nights, they see a lantern flashing on the rock, its light winking out as if snuffed by an unseen hand. Faint groans carry on the wind, mingling with the tinkle of a distant bell. I hear the stories in the village, and I say nothing. My hands still tremble when I think of that place, of the coffin stare, of the footsteps on the gallery. Decades pass, and a young keeper, James, takes charge of Small's light. He laughs at the tales, calls them old men's fancies. His first night, he bolts every door, his bravado fading as the wind howls. In the lantern room, he tends the lamp, its flame steady against the dark. But at midnight, he hears it, footsteps on the gallery slow and heavy. His heart races as he grips the lamp's base. A tap comes at the window, faint but deliberate. He forces himself to look. A gaunt figure leans on the railing, dressed in an old keeper's coat, its face ashen, eyes hollow. It stares at him unblinking, then turns and climbs the stairs to the lantern. James watches, frozen, as the figure steps into the flame and vanishes, the light flaring briefly before settling. He runs at dawn, his boots slipping on the rocks, and never returns. The sea keeps its secrets, and Small's light stands alone, its lamp burning through the ages. But on the darkest nights, when the waves crash and the wind screams, something stirs in the tower. A cough echoes up the stairs, a shadow moves in the lantern's glow, and the ghost of Small's light keeps its watch. Story 10. The Pianist of Seguin Island. I am Julia, or what remains of me, bound to this desolate rock called Seguin Island. My story is not one of warmth or redemption, but of cold keys, endless fog, and a melody that clings to the air like damp mist. If you're reading this, you've heard the whispers, sailors' tales of a haunting tune drifting from the lighthouse, a piano that plays itself. Let me tell you how I became the ghost they speak of, how my fingers still dance across phantom keys, and why this island will never let me go. It was 1853 when I came to Seguin, a bride barely 20, my heart full of dreams as fragile as sea glass. My husband Thomas was the new keeper of the lighthouse, a man of quiet strength but few words. The island was a jagged speck off Maine's coast, surrounded by the restless Atlantic, its lighthouse a solitary beacon in the fog. I thought I could endure the isolation for him. I was wrong. The first weeks were bearable. I busied myself with the keeper's house, a squat, weathered cottage beside the tower. I scrubbed salt-streaked windows, mended curtains, and tried to make a home in the shadow of the sea. But the island had a way of shrinking you. The wind howled without end, carrying the cries of gulls and the crash of waves against the rocks. There were no neighbors, no voices, no life beyond the lighthouse's beam slicing through the dark. Loneliness crept into my bones, colder than the winter gales. I begged Thomas for something to fill the silence, books, paints, anything to keep my mind from unraveling. He listened, his face softening, and one freezing January day he returned from the mainland with a gift. I heard the grunts of men and the creak of wood before I saw it, a grand piano, its ebony finish gleaming like wet slate, carried over the rocky shore by a crew of weathered boatmen. It was a marvel, a thing of beauty in this bleak place, and I wept at the sight of it. But with it came only one sheet of music, simple rag, its notes stark and repetitive, like the rhythm of the tides. That night, by the flicker of an oil lamp, I sat at the piano and played. The melody was haunting, its cadence both mournful and strangely alive, like a heartbeat trapped in the keys. The notes filled the cottage, spilling out into the fog, and for a moment I felt whole. Thomas smiled, a rare thing, and I thought the piano would save me, but one song, no matter how beautiful, cannot hold back the weight of solitude. By the second day, I played it again and again. The notes were all I had, my only tether to something beyond the endless gray. I played until my fingers ached, until the melody wove itself into my thoughts, my dreams. The polar night stretched on, weeks of darkness where the sun barely rose, and I could not stop. The piano became my world, the rag my language. I played to drown out the wind, the waves, the silence that threatened to swallow me. Thomas began to change. At first he listened, his eyes distant but patient. Then his patience frayed. "Enough, Julia," he'd mutter, his voice sharp as the rocks outside. I couldn't stop. The melody was a pulse, a lifeline. I played through meals, through sleepless nights, the notes echoing over the still waters. The cottage vibrated with it, the walls seeming to hum. Thomas's face grew haggard, his eyes hollow. He'd pace the small rooms, hands clenched, muttering to himself. I saw the strain in him, but I couldn't tear myself from the bench. The piano was all I had left. Weeks bled into months. The fog grew thicker, the air heavier. One night, as the lighthouse beam swept across the sea, Thomas stood in the doorway, his silhouette rigid. "Stop," he said, his voice low and trembling. I didn't. My fingers moved of their own accord, the rag pouring out like a confession. He shouted, but the music drowned him out. I didn't see the axe in his hand until it was too late. The first blow struck the piano, splintering the wood with a scream that wasn't human. I froze, my hands hovering over the keys as he swung again and again, the instrument collapsing into jagged pieces. Shards of ebony flew, the strings snapping with discordant wails. I turned, my heart pounding, and saw his face, wild, unrecognizable, consumed by a madness I hadn't seen coming. I screamed his name, but the axe swung toward me. Pain seared through me, sharp and blinding. The world tilted, the firelight blurring as I fell. The last thing I saw was the ruined piano, its keys scattered like broken teeth. Then darkness. I don't know how long I drifted in that void. Time means nothing to the dead, but I woke, if you can call it that, to the sound of the foghorn, low and mournful, calling to no one. The keeper's house was empty, the piano gone, the axe abandoned by the hearth. Thomas was nowhere, but I felt his absence like a wound. Later, I learned from the whispers of passing sailors that he'd thrown himself into the sea, the weight of what he'd done too much to bear. The piano, or what was left of it, had been cast into the icy waters, sinking through the broken ice. I thought death would free me, but Seguin holds its ghosts tightly. I linger in the keeper's house, a shadow tethered to the place where I died. The piano is gone, but I feel it still, its keys under my fingers, the rag playing in my mind. At dusk, when the fog rolls in, I sit at the phantom bench and play. The notes drift out to sea, faint but undeniable, carried by the wind. Sailors hear it, their faces paling as they cross themselves and steer clear of the island. They call me the ghost of the keeper's wife, a story to frighten green hands. The lighthouse has new keepers now, caretakers who come and go. They bring their own piano sometimes, a small upright left in the kitchen. They cover it with a cloth, but I cannot resist. When the house is quiet, I touch the keys. The rag plays itself, the notes soft. The ivory marked with faint scratches no one can explain. They feel me, these caretakers. They hear the floorboards creak, see the lamplight flicker. One swore he saw me, a woman by the piano, my face pale and sorrowful, my hands moving over keys that shouldn't sound. By morning, I'm gone. The music, a memory they doubt. But I'm here. I play because I must, because the melody is all I have left of who I was. The fog wraps the island in its embrace, and my song carries on, a ghost's lament that will never fade. If you sail near Seguin on a calm, fog-shrouded evening, listen closely. You'll hear it, a soft, haunting rag drifting from the lighthouse. That's me, Julia, still bound to this place, my fingers forever tracing the notes of a song that killed me. Story 11, The Wraith on Boon Island. I am Catherine Bright, and this is my story, woven from the salt and sorrow of Boon Island. The year was 1858, and I followed my new husband, Lucas, to this desolate speck of granite off the New England coast. Boon Island Light was his charge as first assistant keeper, and I, his bride, came to share the weight of his duties. The lighthouse stood tall, a gray sentinel against the endless Atlantic, its 168 steps spiraling up to the lantern that warned ships away from the jagged reef. Our home was a frail wooden keeper's house, clinging to the rock like a barnacle, trembling under the sea's relentless fists. I thought I could endure the isolation, the cold, the ceaseless wind. I was wrong. It began with the storm. November's end brought a tempest that churned the sky into a bruise black and purple, swelling over the horizon. The wind screamed, tearing at the shutters, and the waves pounded the island until the ground itself seemed to shudder. Lucas was sick, his breath shallow, his skin hot with fever. Still, he was stubborn, duty-bound. "The light, Cat," he rasped, his voice barely cutting through the gale. "It must stay lit." I begged him to stay, to rest, but he wouldn't listen. He tied a rope around his waist, kissed my forehead with chapped lips, and staggered out into the storm. I watched from the window, my heart clawing at my ribs. The tower loomed against the roiling sky, its iron ladder slick with ice. Lucas moved slowly, each step a battle against the wind. He reached the rocks, his silhouette small against the monstrous waves. I pressed my hands to the glass, whispering his name. Then it came. A wave, taller than the tower itself, a wall of water that roared over the reef. It struck with a sound like the world breaking, and Lucas was gone. The rope snapped taut, jerking against the anchor bolt. My scream was swallowed by the storm's howl. I ran outside, the wind slamming into me, my nightgown plastered to my skin. The rope burned my hands as I seized it, pulling with all my strength. The sea fought me, dragging at Lucas's weight, but I wouldn't let go. Inch by inch I hauled him back, my bare feet slipping on the icy rocks. His body emerged from the foam, limp, his face pale as the moon. I dragged him to the keeper's house, my arms shaking, my breath ragged. Inside, I laid him at the foot of the tower's spiral stairs, his clothes soaked, his eyes closed. He was so cold. I pressed my fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse, but there was nothing, only silence, heavier than the storm. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching his hand, willing him to wake. The wind shrieked through the cracks, and the sea battered the walls. But I couldn't leave him. Duty gnawed at me, though. His duty, now mine. The light had to burn. Ships were out there, blind in the storm. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling, and began the climb. The tower was freezing, the iron steps biting my bare feet. Each of the 168 steps felt like a mountain. At the top, I trimmed the wick, lit the lamp, and watched the flame catch, its weak glow pushing back the darkness. I stayed there, staring out at the churning sea until my fingers grew numb around the lantern's edge. For 5 nights, I lived in that frozen purgatory. By day, I climbed the tower, tending the light, cleaning the salt-smeared glass, rationing the oil. By night, I sat with Lucas, his body stiffening at the base of the stairs. I wrapped my arms around his hand, whispering to him, begging him to come back. "Lucas, please," I'd say, my voice breaking. "We were supposed to be together." The storm never relented, flinging ice and spray across the island, rattling the tower until I thought it would collapse. I ate what little I could stomach, crumbs of bread, a few dried apples, saving the rest for the light's sake. Sleep was a stranger. I caught moments of it, slumped against the wall, Lucas's cold fingers in mine. The tower became my world, its spiral stairs a cruel infinity. Each climb was harder, my strength fading, my hands raw from the cold iron. The wind carried strange sounds, low moans, faint rustlings, like footsteps on the stairs when I knew I was alone. Once, I swore I heard a knock at the tower door, sharp and insistent. I stumbled down, heart pounding, and flung it open to find only fog, thick and gray, curling over the rocks. I told myself it was the storm playing tricks. But the animals knew better. The stray cat we'd taken in refused to enter the tower, hissing at the door. The gulls, usually bold, avoided the island entirely, their cries distant and wary. By the 5th night, I was a shadow of myself. My skin was blue with cold, my lips cracked, my voice a hoarse whisper. I climbed the tower one last time, my legs buckling under me. The oil was nearly gone, the flame flickering. I leaned against the lantern, staring out at the sea, now a black void. "Lucas," I murmured, "I can't do this anymore." The light went out. I didn't have the strength to relight it. I stumbled down the stairs, collapsing beside him, my hand on his chest. I closed my eyes, the storm's roar fading into a dull hum. When the fishermen came at dawn, the storm had passed, and the sea was still. They found me at the base of the stairs, curled around Lucas, my breath shallow, my skin like ice. I heard their voices, distant, as if underwater. "She's alive," one said, but I barely cared. They tried to pull me away, but I clung to Lucas, whispering his name. My mind was unraveling, laughter bubbling up, sharp and wild, as I rocked back and forth. They carried me to their boat, but I don't remember the journey. Days later, in a mainland hospital, I slipped away, my body too broken, my heart too heavy. But I never left Boon Island. I am still here, bound to the tower, to the light I failed. The years have blurred, decades slipping like waves over the reef. The lighthouse stands as it always has, its beam cutting through the night. Fishermen passing the island on moonless nights claim they see me, a woman in white, sad-faced, walking the rocks. They're not wrong. I wander the shore, my feet bare on the cold stone, watching the sea that took Lucas from me. The tower calls me, its stairs echoing with my steps when no one else is there. At midnight, my moan drifts from the lantern, a sound of grief that never fades. The keepers who came after me felt it too. They heard the rustling, the knocking at the door, only to find fog and silence. Dogs won't climb the tower, their hackles raised at something they can't name. Cats stare at the sky, their eyes fixed on nothing human eyes can see. On stormy nights, I am strongest, my presence heavy in the air. I climb the 168 steps, my hands brushing the iron, my voice whispering through the wind. I tend the light, as I did in those final days, though no ship will ever know my warning. I am Catherine Bright, the Wraith of Boon Island. The sea took my love, my life, my sanity, but it cannot take my duty. I will keep the light burning forever in this place where the storm never ends. Story 12, Mad Maggie's Revenge. I'm Michael Hayes, and I was a fool to laugh at the warnings about Block Island's southeast lighthouse. In the summer of 1903, I arrived to take my post as keeper, a young man eager to tend the lamp and live in solitude by the sea. The islanders' tales of Mad Maggie, some vengeful ghost of a keeper's wife, sounded like nonsense to me. I was 24, practical, with no patience for superstition. But the lighthouse, perched on grassy bluffs under a pale sun, held secrets I couldn't ignore. By the time I fled, half mad and breathless, I knew Maggie's rage was real. Her story is mine now, carved into my bones. Let me tell you how it unfolded, night by night, until I broke. The first evening was quiet. I climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room, lit the wick, and watched the beam cut through the dusk. The lighthouse was old, its brick walls weathered by salt and wind, but it felt sturdy, dependable. My dog Rusty, a scruffy mutt with a knack for sensing trouble, curled up by the hearth in the keeper's quarters below. I unpacked my things, books, clothes, a few tools, and settled in. The townsfolk had been grim when I arrived. "Don't stay up past midnight," one old fisherman muttered, his eyes darting to the tower. "Maggie don't like men in her house." I smirked and tipped my hat. Ghost stories were for children. That night, I slept on a cot in the parlor, the ocean's rhythm lulling me. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a faint clatter from the kitchen. Rusty was up, ears pricked, staring at the doorway. I lit a candle and stepped into the room. Pots and pans, neatly hung when I'd gone to bed, were swaying on their hooks, clanging softly as if nudged by an unseen hand. I froze, my breath catching. Rusty whimpered, pressing against my leg. Wind must have gotten in, I told myself, though every window was shut tight. I checked the locks, straightened the pans, and went back to bed. Rusty didn't sleep. Neither did I, not really. The second night, the noises grew bolder. I was in the lantern room polishing the lens when a creak came from below, like someone settling into a chair. Rusty growled, his fur bristling. I descended the stairs, my boots loud on the iron steps, and found the parlor empty. The rocking chair by the hearth was still, but its cushion bore a faint dent, as if someone had just risen. My pulse quickened. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the silence. Rusty stayed close, his eyes fixed on the kitchen doorway. I gripped my lantern and stepped inside. Nothing. The pans were still, the stove cold, but as I turned to leave, a single spoon clattered to the floor from the counter. I hadn't touched it. My hand shook as I picked it up, its metal icy against my palm. "Just settling," I muttered, but my voice sounded thin, unconvincing. Back in the parlor, I tried to read, but the words blurred. Rusty paced, his nails clicking on the floorboards. Around midnight, the air grew heavy, like a storm was brewing indoors. Then came a sharp crack, dishes falling in the kitchen. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Rusty barked, shrill and panicked. I grabbed a poker from the hearth and crept to the doorway. Plates were tumbling from the shelves one by one, shattering against the stone floor. I stood frozen, watching them fall, each crash louder than the last. Then, in the dim glow of my lantern, I saw her, a faint shape by the stove, a woman in a tattered white dress, her hair wild, her eyes burning with something I can only call hate. She didn't move, just stared, her presence filling the room like smoke. Rusty howled, and I backed away, my legs weak. The front door was behind me, but when I reached for it, the handle wouldn't budge. It was locked from the inside. By the third night, I was fraying. I hadn't slept more than an hour since the pan started moving. Rusty refused to enter the kitchen, cowering by the parlor hearth. I kept the fire going, hoping the warmth would steady me. The islanders' warnings echoed in my head. Mad Maggie haunts here. I'd laughed at them, but now I felt watched, every creak and shadow a threat. I decided to stay awake, sitting in the parlor with a book I couldn't read, my knife in my pocket for no reason I could name. At 2 a.m., the noises started again. Not dishes this time, but footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps climbing the tower stairs. I gripped the knife, my palms slick with sweat. Rusty growled, low and guttural, his eyes on the stairwell. The steps grew louder, each one a heavy thud, as if someone dragged their feet. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer, only the relentless thump, thump, thump. I forced myself to the stairwell, holding my lantern high. The spiral was empty, the steps fading as I reached them. But when I turned back, the parlor door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. Rusty yelped, scratching at the wood. I yanked the handle, but it was stuck, as if held by an iron grip. From the kitchen came a low, guttural laugh. A woman's voice, sharp and bitter. I pounded on the door, shouting, but the laughter grew louder, mocking me. Then, silence. When I finally pried the door open, the kitchen was untouched, but my blanket was draped over the parlor mirror, as if someone had covered it while I was trapped. The fourth night broke me. I'd barely eaten, my nerves too raw to stomach food. Rusty was a wreck, refusing to leave my side. I decided to face the lantern room, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I climbed the stairs, each step colder than the last, and lit the lamp. The beam swept the horizon steady and bright, but the air felt wrong, thick, like I was breathing through cloth. At midnight, the noises started again, a faint tapping, then a loud bang from the keeper's quarters below. I rushed down, Rusty at my heels, and found the kitchen in chaos. Knives and forks were scattered across the floor, a cast-iron pan teetering on the counter's edge. I grabbed it, clutching it like a shield, and that's when I saw her again. Maggie, clear as day, standing by the window. Her dress was shredded, her face pale, her eyes blazing with fury. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice a knife in my skull. I stumbled back, and the pan flew from my hands, slamming into the wall inches from my head. Glass shattered somewhere, a window, a mirror, I couldn't tell. I ran for the front door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it, the lock clicking with a finality that turned my blood cold. I grabbed my coat and a wool blanket, desperation clawing at me. Maggie's silhouette appeared in the parlor, arms raised, her laughter a jagged edge. I threw the blanket over the nearest mirror, hoping to block her reflection, but she was everywhere, her shadow flickering in the lantern's glow, her voice echoing in my ears. "Get out!" she shrieked again, and the air itself seemed to press against me, forcing me toward the door. I kicked it, pounded it, until it gave way, splintering under my weight. I stumbled into the night, the cold biting my skin, Maggie's cry chasing me down the bluff. I ran toward the shore, my breath ragged, my hair standing on end. The ferry dock was my only thought, escape, safety, anywhere but here. I don't know how I reached the dock. The island was silent, the stars sharp above me. My coat was torn, my hands bloodied from the door. Rusty panted beside me, his eyes wide with fear. I waited for the morning ferry, my mind replaying every sound, every shadow. When the Coast Guard came, they found the lighthouse empty. No sign of a struggle, just my footprints in the dew, leading away from the tower. They didn't believe my story, no one did. But I know what I saw, what I felt. Maggie's rage wasn't just a ghost story, it was a warning. I never went back. The islanders say the lighthouse still hums with her anger. Men who visit feel it, beds shaking, doors locking, knives flying from pantries. Women, they say, walk untouched, as if Maggie spares them her wrath. I don't care who believes me. I hear her scream in my dreams, feel the weight of her eyes. The lighthouse stands, its beam cutting the night, but it's hers, Mad Maggie's, and no man who steps inside will ever forget her.